So when we talk about Zen, Zen is very much connected to the Chinese kind of sensibility. Zen was brought into China by the Dharma. He was an Indian monk, and he was the 28th patriarch after the transmission from the Buddha down. He was also a prince of a minor country, not the crown prince, just a regular prince. And after the Bodhidharma arrived in China, he only had a handful of students. So from him passing down, it wasn't until the Sixth Patriarch of China, we count the Bodhidharma as the first patriarch of China, it wasn't until the Sixth Patriarch of China that Zen really took off and was spread throughout the country in a major way. Vietnam was exposed to Zen after Rinzai, a monk called Teni Daluji. He's also an Indian monk, but he was the student of the third patriarch, Sir Can, from China, and he brought Zen into Vietnam, which his lineage lasted for over 1,000 years, and then Zen was kind of brought again, and Rinzai Zen was brought into Vietnam in the 17th century. So when Zen took off, and I have to talk about the Sixth Patriarch in this, the Sixth Patriarch was a very interesting individual. First of all, he's illiterate. So he's a woodcutter. He was so poor. He was raised by his mom. His dad passed away early, and he would cut wood, gather wood to sell, and supported his mother. So one day he walked by a person who was chanting the Diamond Sutra. And as he heard a line in the Diamond Sutra, he experienced what you call a sudden instant awakening. And this is a guy who's illiterate, who doesn't know how to read. And after his mother passed away, he realized that something profound had happened to him. So he went and looked for the fifth patriarch. He joined the fifth patriarch's monastery. And as soon as he came into the monastery, he bowed to the fifth patriarch, and the fifth patriarch says, "Who are you? Where are you coming from?" And he says, "I'm from Linh Nam." And Linh Nam is actually Vietnam at that point. It was annexed into China for 1,000 years at that point. And so people consider Linh Nam as barbarians. So the Chinese consider Vietnam as barbarians. So the fifth patriarch looked at him and says, "You're a barbarian. What do you know about awakening and Zen?" And the fifth patriarch, he was a young man at that time, and he says, "Is there a distinction between Buddha nature from one person to another? It doesn't matter if I'm a barbarian." And the fifth patriarch was happy with that answer. He says, "Okay, what do you know?" And he says, I used to be a woodcutter." "Okay, then you go to the monastery's kitchen and and help grind the rice." And back then, if you harvest the rice, you have to get it out of the sheath. So you have to grind it to get it out of the sheath. And that's what he did for 6 months at the monastery. So one day, the fifth patriarch, knowing that he was going to die soon, he wanted to find a successor. So he announced that we're going to have a competition, a poetry competition. Whoever writes a poetry about their understanding of Zen, and to show their attainment, and whoever gets it, I will give him my robe and bow. And one of the Fifth Patriarch's most revered and senior students is, what's his name, is Shen Xiu. Shen Xiu was a scholar. He was also from noble birth. And he was looked at by the whole Sangha as somebody who is probably going to inherit the robe and bow. So he wrote a poem on the wall of the monastery. He says, the body is like the Bodhi tree. The mind is like the bright mirror stand. At all time, we must strive to polish it and must not let dust collect. So everybody, including Master Hong Jian, which is the Fifth Patriarch, really praised the verse, say, wow, that's good prose. And the monk were told to recite the verse, but privately, the master told Shen Xiu, you know, you got to go a little bit further than this. Try to revise it and come back to me. And Shen Xiu couldn't write another one. He couldn't revise it. So he just kept quiet. Everyone was reciting it and praising it. Wow, it's such a beautiful poem. And this person has great attainment. Until it got into the kitchen, where Hu Nang was, grinding rice. When he heard of it, he realized that the verse did not express the true Dharma. So he said to the person who recited to him, look, I can't read or write. Could you take me to where the poem was written? So he went to the wall where the poem was written, and he says, read it once again for me. And when his friend read it to him, he says, you know what? I can't write, so you're going to have to write for me. So write this right next to it. And this is what Hu Nang's poem read. Bodhi originally had no tree. The bright mirror has no stand. From the beginning till now, not a single thing exists. Where could the dust attach? So, I mean, everyone kind of read that poem and thought, what? And when they heard it was Hu Nang who wrote it, they thought, what? This guy is a newbie. He just came to the monastery for 6 months. He's grinding rice in the kitchen. He doesn't even know to read and write. What the hell does he know about Zen? And the master, after he read Hu Nang's poem, he called the assembly and he says, this person has denigrated Zen. And scolded Hu Nang right in front of everyone. He called Hu Nang to come up and he gave him 3 sticks. and then dismissed the assembly. Of course, everybody thought Hu Nang was punished, except Hu Nang. He knew that the master wanted him to come in the middle of the night, 3 a.m. So he came to the master's room. Actually, it's not 3 a.m. It's actually about 6 a.m. Because 1 hour in Chinese is 2 hours in our time. Anyway, so he came to the master at 6 a.m. and the master called him into his room and said, listen, you have got the true attainment of the Dharma, but I can't give you the rope and the bow formally because there'll be a riot in my 500 students. First of all, you're a barbarian. Secondly, you've just got here 6 months ago. You're not even fully ordained. You're just a novice. So what I can do is, but I can't give my robe and bow to someone who doesn't have the true attainment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this robe and bow. And what you're going to do is run. Because if they know you got the robe and bow, they're going to kill you. There's 500 of them studying here for so many years, and you've just got here for 6 months. So Hu Nang took the robe and bowl, and ran. Disappeared. And there was an uproar in the students after the fifth patriarch passed away and announced that he gave the robe and bowl to Hunang. And everyone was really surprised and thought, no, he must be senile, and Hunang did something to him to maybe steal the robes and the bowl and took off. So after the master passed away, they decided that Chen Qiu was going to be the leader of the Sangha, and Hunang took off and left. At that time, Hunang didn't even get his full ordination, so he's still a lay person. He's still a lay person with hair and everything. So he went into the mountain and he lived with hunters for 15 years. Lived and worked among hunters. He still continues to chop wood. And one day he passed by a monastery. There was a couple of monks standing outside debating about the flag in front of the monastery. And one side said, well, it's the flag that's flying. The other one says, no, it's the wind that's causing the flag that's flying. So they're having a debate about it. And Hunang passed by, heard them, and he says, no, it's neither the wind or the flag that's flying, it's your mind moving. And as soon as the abbot of the monastery heard him say that, he approached Hunang and says, may I know your name? And Hunang spoke of his name, and he said, could you reveal your identity? Are you the person that the fifth patriarch gave the robe and the bowl to? And Hunang says, yes, I am. I have the robe and the bowl here. So the abbot of the monastery says, I'm going to ask you to come in with me. And he took Hunang to the main hall and asked Hunang to do the full ordination. So he shaved Hunang's head and gave him full ordination. Then he asked Hunang, he says, it's time for you. Hunang, who started the and one of his students that I really like is Yong Chia. He wrote a beautiful, beautiful prose called Song of Enlightenment, which, if you know how to read classical Chinese like me, you just fall in love with it. And so after Hunang passed down a couple more generations, 5 houses of Zen was founded. And one of that house of Zen is Rinzai Zen. Rinzai Zen is considered the core of the northern school because Hunang went to the north and started his teaching there. Rinzai Zen is a school of sudden enlightenment. Okay, and the southern school, which was started by Shen Qiu and later some of Hunang's disciples, is called gradual enlightenment. And there's a distinct flavor in those two schools. And of the 5 major schools of Zen, only 2 survive, which is Rinzai and Soto to this day. So Rinzai, its emphasis is on sudden awakening, sudden enlightenment, like Hunang, you just kind of like suddenly just wake up and realize reality. What are you waking up and realizing? You're waking up and realizing your Buddha nature, the unchanging, the pure and clear self, or I said no self, your Buddha nature inside. And once you wake up to this, I would say it's pretty much an irreversible process. If I could compare it to the other school in Buddhism, the Theravada Buddhism has 4 stages of enlightenment, and in Zen, after Kensho, which is the sudden enlightenment, seeing one's own nature. That's what the word Kensho means in Rinzai Zen. So after you see your own nature, now in Theravada Buddhism, it's called the stream entry or Sopatana. That's the first stage of enlightenment. And after that, the people in Rinzai school would further practice more koan, and usually they have gain this sudden enlightenment, usually from a koan. It's a method that came actually entirely out of China. It's an innovation. I call it a spiritual innovation. So what is a koan? It's really hard to talk about the koan. A koan is a question without logical answer. It is designed to shock the mind into, well, I call it stopping the mind, into kind of realization of one's own nature. So also a koan is a question. It's a question of great doubt. It's like swallowing a red iron ball. If you try to vomit it out, you can't. But if you try to swallow it, you can't either. So for the whole entire time that somebody practices a koan, it's, I would say, very uncomfortable. And why do we do this to ourselves? Because Rinzai is probably the most direct method to awakening. Soto Zen is a little more gentle. So you have the gradual method of sitting and just let things slowly falling away. Whereas Rinzai, well, you shock the mind into just collapsing and everything falls away. So you can see one method is very intense and the other one is very gentle. In Japan, they compare the two Zen method as the farmer Zen, which is the Soto Zen, and the warrior Zen. Rinzai Zen is very popular in Vietnam as well among intellectuals and people who read a lot and generals. There are some really famous generals in Vietnam and lay people in Vietnam that in Vietnam's history that practice Rinzai Zen and share a lot of the sensibilities that Rinzai Zen brought. Now, one of the main aspects of Rinzai Zen is, well, both schools emphasizes Zazen, which is sitting Zen, the actual practice. But Rinzai Zen emphasized the koan practice after someone has a kind of past the beginner's practice and is able to focus a little bit better, have better concentration, things settle down a little bit. The koan practice leads a person to Kensho, which is realizing their own nature, their own unchanging nature. And then they would practice shikantaza. Okay, Soto Zen is the opposite. They don't really emphasize Kensho. They emphasize Zazen and shikantaza. So if I can compare the two, Soto Zen is probably more closer to the Vipassana in the Theravadan tradition than Rinzai. But then I've seen masters in the Theravada tradition that use the same kind of Dharma combat method that Rinzai Zen has, if not specifically the koan. So, I mean, there's a lot of bleeding over of these practices in Vietnam because Vietnam doesn't have so much of, I call it sectarian divide like in Japan. So there's a lot of overlapping practice in many of the Buddhist tradition in Vietnam. So one of the both practices does dokusan, which is, I call it a spiritual interview. Private questions and answer between the students and the teacher. But Rinzai specifically stressed on the confrontational part of that. So the teacher will challenge the students and push the students towards, I call it progress. So if you're standing on a cliff and you're falling into grace over the cliff, the proverbial cliff, chances are you got my boot print in the back of your your butt. Because as a Rinzai Zen teacher, my job is to push you over. Okay. I don't do this unless somebody requests me to do this. But realizing you know what you're getting into, okay? when you request to be my student and you specifically request to have the Koan method, okay? So another interesting practice with Rinzai Zen is after Kensho, the students have to further study the main text, the Gateless Gate, Blue Cliff Record, and Record of Vinci, and have to go through a period of Koan practice, using many Koans, not just one. But the initial awakening, they just only use one, and once they crack that one, I give you a new one to crack. Okay, so advanced practice of Rinzai Zen is that we'll go on extended solitary retreats. The longest I went was 4 months. Of course, I'm working full time and have a business at that time, so I couldn't go any longer than 4 months. But my teacher went on extended solitary retreats for 3-4 years at a time, and he did that for 10 years. Another interesting practice about Rinzai Zen is once you, I call it, get to the mastery phase, you start to travel and engage in Dharma combat with other masters. Why do you do that? It's like a samurai, you know. If he wants to know how good his martial arts is, you have to go and challenge other martial art master. So if someone really serious about their Rinzai Zen practice, then they look for other people, other accomplished masters, and they go and challenge them in a Dharma combat. And sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. It's just works that way. But if you lose, chances are you've got something to learn. And that's a plus either way. And I did that in 2016 when I traveled throughout Vietnam. So I've met quite a few masters in Vietnam. Some of them got mad and kicked me out of their monastery. So I met a Dharma friend in Vietnam who really loves hanging out with yogis and I call it meditation masters in the mountains. So he would drive me around to meet all these people, and I had some pretty interesting Dharma combat with them. It was pretty fun. And when I came back to Toronto, I did the same thing with two of the Toronto centers here, Zen centers here. And I have to say, the Toronto Zen Center, the sensei, he is a student of Philip Kapleau. He's quite accomplished. He's got 40 years of practice under his belt. So I learned quite a few things from him. So don't say that Zen, even though we practice outside the scriptures, we don't have scripture study. A lot of the Soto and Rinzai Zen priests in Japan and in Vietnam would go through a series of studies. And in Vietnam, mostly they would have at least a minimum of a bachelor in Buddhism study. And I've listed for you all the texts that is involved in the bachelor up to the master and PhD level in the Buddhist university in Vietnam. And this Buddhist university was surprisingly established by Thich Nhat Hanh in the 1960s. So a lot of the monks, Zen monks in China and Japan and Korea and Vietnam has these I call it textual study before they embarked on I call it intense Zen practice. So they have a good map in their hand to help them with the practice. And with this practice, a lot of them after completing their study would go into long-term solitary retreats to challenge themselves to make a breakthrough in Zen. So when you go into a Rinzai monastery, the biggest difference you're going to see is that they're meditating facing each other or in a classroom style if the room is too small. But if you go into a Soto monastery, you're going to find that they're meditating facing the wall. So most of Zen in Vietnam is Soto, sort of Soto-like tradition, but they're not really calling themselves Soto. They call themselves the Patriarch Zen. So most of them are sitting facing the wall. The other difference when you go into a Rinzai or Soto monastery is that Soto monastery has a lot of, I call a lot of rites and rituals and even chanting. But Rinzai Zen monastery is pretty basic. You've got a schedule posted somewhere, and the rest of the thing you're gonna have to figure out yourself. Nobody tells you how everything works. So you wander around kind of like, what do I do next? I just follow everybody else. And that's a part of the Rinzai Zen training, is that you got to figure it out yourself, you know, and kind of be super observing. In the Soto monasteries, you're going to find that they have a particular way of doing things, a particular way of walking. Some of them get too extreme as to, you know, they have to lay the cushion a certain way. And to be honest with you, it drives me nuts. Because I practiced Rinzai for so long, I'm so easygoing. And when I go to these monasteries where, you know, you got, you know, you go to the Buddha hall and they're like, no, you don't lay down your cushion that way. You have to lay down this way. And the first thing that comes up to my mind is why? Because I'm so used to questioning what's going on in reality. So, or they say you have to walk this way. You know, you walk into this door and exit this door in the Buddha hall. And the next question that comes to my mind is, huh? So I mean, as much as I like the Soto Zen masters, they do, you know, are very accomplished at Dokusan. It just doesn't appeal to me to stay at their monastery. So the Rinzai Zen monastery is interesting in a way, but if you're a shy person, good luck. Because when you go in there, you're gonna have to figure out things for yourself, and sometimes you're gonna have to ask people, you know, what to do, and you know, they'll usually tell you when you're wrong. So they won't tell you the right way of doing things, but they'll actually tell you when you're wrong, and they'll like, whack, you're wrong. Don't go that way. Don't do that, right? So that's the Rinzai monastery practice method. Another aspect of the Rinzai practice is that I went to Plum Village, and Thich Nhat Hanh belongs to an offshoot Rinzai Zen branch that branched off from the original branch that my teacher belonged to, called Liu Wang, and he does the open, I call it the open Dharma combat, just like the
Lotus, we can't hear you if you can hear us.
Sorry, my internet's unstable. Kick me out. So I was at Plum Village in 2013, which is before Thich had his stroke in 2014. And I was there celebrating the new year, and he had gathered 500 of all his students. And a lot of students came from different places as well in the main Buddha hall. And he would read out one of Vietnam's most famous poetry, which there's a lot of Zen hidden messages in there. And he would read a couple of lines and point to each one of his students, call them out by name, and says, "You tell me what's going on." And imagine if you were asked to stand up in front of 500 people. That's just a monastic, not talking about the participants, the lay participants. You add another 500 people on top of that. So you're asked to stand up in front of 1,000 people and do Dharma combat with the teacher. So that's pretty intimidating. So you get it that most people who come to the spiritual practice, who comes to the meditation practice, are introverts. Introverts are a lot more attracted to this kind of thing than extroverts. So if you're an introvert and you're kind of shy and you like sitting and closing your eyes and going into yourself, and you were asked to stand up in front of 1,000 people and challenge the master, or talk about your understanding of something right on the spot. I mean, I'm pretty sure that most of those monks do not have Toastmaster practices like me. Public speaking training. It's called Toastmaster. So it's pretty intimidating. But that's how the Rinzai masters before, that's how the Rinzai teaching is done in Asia. Not really the private interview, the Dokusan elements is there, but it's the open classroom. It's the open challenging of the classroom. So also Rinzai Zen also has an element of what you call pressure cooking. So if you go on a solitary retreat or usually a group retreat in the Rinzai Zen tradition, you're going to be sitting 8 to 10 hours of meditation, observing a koan. And let me tell you, it's pretty intense. It's pretty intense, right? And you go to the master and you go and you're agitated and you're like, I don't get this. I'm so frustrated. What am I going to do? And the master just looks at you and laughs and just say, you go back. It's okay. Or worse, the master says, either you get it or you get out of my monastery. That's called pressure cooking. I haven't really done that with many of my students because I think Western students don't take it very well with that kind of stuff. But I did do it successfully with one of my Chinese students, because I asked him, I said, how far do you want me to take it? And he said, well, take it as far as you can. And I said, oh, really? It was really fun. So because I was seeing him privately. So, one day he came to see me and I said, I'm going to start teaching you the koan, helping you finding koan. And he says, what? And I helped him, discover a koan that he always was curious about. And then I told him, I said, you got 3 months to practice. And he looked at me and he says, are you crazy? How long is your best student able to crack the koan? I said, 5 years. He looked at me and he says, why only 3 months for me? And I said, well, listen, this is your koan, number one. Number two, you've been wondering about this pretty much your whole life. It's either now or never. And he says, yeah, but only 3 months. I said, well, he looked at me and he said, well, I thought Zen teachers are really compassionate. You have compassion for me, don't you? And I looked at him and I said, yeah, I have a lot of compassion. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time right now. I'm in full-time school. I work. So sorry, I've got tons of compassion for you, and I feel for you, but I don't have a lot of time. So either do it in 3 months or get out of my face. that is an element of what I call psychological pressure cooking. Okay, and guess what? He went home and he cracked his koan in 6 weeks. That was the fastest that I've ever seen anyone can show. Okay, so it's for people who think that this method is too jarring. Well, it is and it isn't. It is jarring. It is intense. But if you can put up with the intensity, it's very rewarding. Think about it. Among the Fifth Patriarch students, 500 of them, none of them got it. and Yunang was the only one who got it, right? And so, you know, if the Koan method was easy, then everybody would do it. That's why it's called the warrior Zen. Why? Because when a warrior face each other, it's do or die. Okay. So Zen, it's a school that got its inheritance from the Yogacara school, which is a mind-only school. It's a I call it a branch of Buddhism called Buddhist psychology. It studies the mind through the meditation practices. Yogacara can be very complicated. I haven't studied all of the text, but probably half of it. And it's also very intensely intellectual. Intellectual at the same time as meditative. So Yogacara, so that the school teaches that everything comes from the mind. Okay. And the more you practice Zen after you Kensho, you will find that this is very much a reality. So how does the Dharma transmission of the lineage in these two school works? Well, in Rinzai Zen, it's absolute minimum requirements that a Zen teacher has achieved Kensho, and most of the time there's a period of integration after the Kensho experience. So for me, it was about 5 years. I'm kind of slow. It took me 13 years to Kensho. I was too busy studying text and too distracted. So don't follow my example. If you feel like becoming an academic, just know that it has nothing to do with Zen, okay? And the teacher also took the Bodhisattva precepts. In Vietnam, some of them take the monastic precepts. Lay teachers in Vietnam are rare. Lay teachers with Zen transmissions are extremely rare because most lay teacher like me, I mean, mostly lay practitioner do not practice intensely meditation practice, especially doing koan. So lay teacher in Vietnam is rare, but there were a few who taught at the Buddhist university before. And there was quite a few, actually, generals in Vietnam's history who were also Zen teachers. You can see why generals love to practice Zen, because they're facing life and death all the time. So in Soto Zen, the main text for Soto Zen is Shobo Gensho and Zazenji by Dogen in Japan. There's not really a main text for that in Vietnam. They mainly study the classical Mahayana texts and some of the classical Chinese Zen texts. So in the Soto tradition in Vietnam, as well as the other tradition that kind of mirrors Soto tradition in Vietnam, there's no requirement of kensho to have the Dharma transmission and qualification of the teacher. Some of them take the Buddhist precept, some doesn't, but most of them are monastics. And in Vietnam, all of the monastics are celibate. So they have to take the Vijnana Code, which is 250 precepts for men and 350 precepts for women. And they have to be celibate. So my teacher is a celibate monk. In Japan, they don't take the Vijnana kind of precepts. They take the Zen precepts that Japan kind of founded, and and Japanese monks are not celibate. They're like ministers. They have wives and children, and usually their marriage happens after their, I call it university Zen training, and usually after 30 to 35 years old. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for question. You can stop the recording now.